Hi, I'm Dr. Natasha Reynolds, and today I'm going to be having a conversation with Karen Foley as part of a series produced by the Psychotherapy Action Network, a global community of mental health professionals and stakeholders dedicated to promoting psychotherapies of depth, insight, and relationship. In this series, we're meeting with lots of different authors and researchers, academics, and policymakers, many of whom are advisors to PsiAN, the Psychotherapy Action Network, and all of whom are concerned about the current state of mental health care policies and practices. We will be hearing from some important voices in our field and what they have to say about the future of psychotherapy. And Psychotherapy Action Network is a 100% volunteer-run nonprofit, and you can learn more at PsiAN.org. Karen Foley, hello. Thank you for meeting us today.
So good to be with you, Natasha.
Yes, thanks. I'm just going to read a brief bit to share our audience a little bit about you. Karen Foley is a steering committee member at PsiAN and serves as a president and CEO of the Juvenile Protective Association, JPA, which was co-founded by Jane Addams in 1901, whose mission is to improve the social and emotional well-being and functioning of vulnerable children. JPA provides therapeutic counseling services, conducts research, shares knowledge, and provides expert consultation and guidance to others serving children and these children and families. And previously, she served as CEO of the Hope Institute and as a president of Chicago Scholars, which is a premier college to career mentoring program reaching high potential students from every public, private, and parochial high school in Chicago. Her corporate experience includes serving as executive vice president and head of global marketing for CNA insurance companies. And Karen earned an MBA from Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and her undergraduate from Hamilton College. Wow, thank you so much again for your time.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I guess I want to first get started and ask you a little bit about your time at JPA. JPA, excuse me, and just learn a little bit about what it is that the mission is, what kind of work you do with that mission, and why.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let me start by saying we have an old-fashioned name, as you mentioned, because we were started in 1901. And I was just reflecting on, as a kid being in the library, reading books on Elizabeth I and Jane Addams and Harriet Tubman and Ida B. Wells, and had no idea that so many decades later I would be running an organization started by one of those women. And because it is still Women's History Month, I think that's a wonderful sort of introduction to this idea of nurturing relationships. And that's really what JPA is about. We could call ourselves the relationship agency. It kind of stems back to this idea that our work in providing therapy to children, primarily in elementary schools, but we serve kids and families of all ages, is so important because there are so many key and important milestones and transitions in their lives in those early years. And setting the stage for those children is really what we're doing, because we want to lift an entire generation of children up to be healthy, mentally, emotionally, socially, as well as academically. And our mission is, as you stated, to help vulnerable children feel and function better at home, at school, and in our community.
So toxic stress, helping parents and families understand how children manage toxic stress. I guess I was curious, like, what is toxic stress, and like, what have you found to be helpful in both informing others and helping children with dealing with toxic stress?
Right. So, I'm not clinically trained. I am, as my colleagues call me, psychologically minded. So you might want to talk to an expert about, an official definition of toxic stress. Here's how I understand it. We're all aware of social determinants of stress and health. And we're working with children, just by way of example, every single child on our caseload today knows a close family member or friend, not who's caught COVID, but who has died from it.
Wow.
And that is not true in my community. It is true in the communities, largely consisting of people of color and underserved communities. It's such a stark difference and reality. And it's on top of what we already understand as adverse childhood experiences. So we have kids who the amount of loss and grief is staggering. Now, I want to be really clear. These are wonderful, exciting, vibrant human beings. But the lives and the communities in which they live, the intergenerational trauma takes a toll. And I think that the work that we're trying to do at JPA, to go back to my earlier statement, is to help these kids visualize and create a narrative of their lives, working with the adults and the system in which they live, which would be family members, guardians, teachers, principals, to build those internal capacities of resilience and self-regulation and feelings of self-worth. Because we know that if kids believe in themselves, everything is possible. And we don't try to predict or project our wishes for what these kids might be. We don't know who they'll be when they grow up. We just know we need every child in this country, in this city, in this world to be their very best selves.
Mm-hmm. And healthy and happy. I love all of those parts.
Happy enough.
Yeah, happy enough.
Happy's good, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess, how does relationship fit into your work as you're thinking about supporting these families and the kids that you're working with?
Well, you know, from your own practice, right? So we're working with children very often referred to us for therapy because of behavioral issues. And we just did an interesting side-by-side comparison, the reasons why kids are referred for therapy. And then we match that against the underlying psychological issue or the social emotional issue. And it goes, this child's distractible. This child won't pay attention. This child is disobedient. This child is disruptive. This child is disrespectful. This child has peer conflict. This child just hit me. This kid bit me. You know, we're looking at all the reasons they get referred. We go into the session. This is a child who has had tremendous loss and grief. Could be a parent who has a substance abuse or mental health issue. It could be severe poverty. There's not enough food. It's not warm enough. It's not a safe place. Over half the kids we serve are homeless or they have homeless instability, right? So they couch surf. We know where we're going to be today, but we don't know where we're going to be tomorrow. They live in these environments that are incredibly disruptive. And so we look at the symptoms, and part of our work is also with teachers is to say, let's get behind and underneath that. You know, we had a case with a teacher who is incredibly frustrated with a 5-year-old because this 5-year-old would not sit on the carpet square with the rest of the kids, right? So you just took a break because your cat was in the room and Miles wanted some attention. And you thought, well, maybe that would be a little disruptive. Imagine having a classroom of 35-year-olds and you have one kid that keeps running around the room. We don't want to put that child out in the hallway, but we see that a lot. We don't want to be calling the parent, blaming the parent that the kid isn't behaving. Here's what we found out about that child. That child was living in a household with a mom and a paramour. And there was real stress and tension between those two adults. And this 5-year-old felt like he was protecting his mom. And going to school was stressful for him. He couldn't be there with his mother, even though he couldn't physically protect her. He was there for her. And nobody kind of tried to understand until we got involved what was promoting this kind of behavior. That insight allowed us to then also be working with the mom, working with the teacher. And here you have this incredibly frustrated teacher who, once she understood not the symptom, but the adversity that the child was dealing with, became one of that kid's strongest advocates. That child went on to first grade, was doing really well, checked in again in second grade, kid's doing great, and so is mom. This is the relationship, though, that gets built. It's, and it takes time. It does. There's a lot of mistrust in the system around healthcare in general, mental health in particular, a lot of stigma. So by being in schools, we're able to normalize the work that we do. And because we're not part of the school official personnel, there is this sense of safety that we can help create for the whole school community, that there's somebody there that you can talk to, who will listen, who will care, does care, and who will, unless there's something, a dangerous situation or concern about the individual's safety, it stays with us. And that is a freedom that only exists inside of a personal relationship.
That's such a powerful story. And I'm hearing how you're connecting and empathizing with the teacher. Like, I get, 1 5-year-old running around is stressful. And then that kind of connecting and empathizing with the 5-year-old and then with the mother, it's like a chain of relationships that all kind of mutually, it sounded like, supported each other through, supporting.
That's right. The kid. And we do a lot of work with teachers. I was mentioning to you earlier through a program called Connect to Kids, where the nexus of the intervention is the teacher. And that comes from some of my own personal experience. Whether we like it or not, good people do bad things to kids all the time, and they don't understand this misinterpretation. There's a translation that often needs to take place, and it's incumbent on us as mental health professionals to work with teachers or pediatricians or lay people. They're not trained in this work. And one of the things I've really noticed about coming from the corporate world and the not-for-profit world into the mental health world is we use the same language and the same words, and we mean something very, very different. So kind of a standing joke, but the first year I was at JPA, I probably spoke with Dr. Buddy every day. He runs our child welfare department here, and he's a researcher. He teaches at the University of Chicago. He's just extraordinary. But I would go in and say, all right, tell me again what you mean when you say relationship. And I've learned that one word opened up a portal of all this wisdom and compassion, and everybody is in relationship with somebody. But the way mental health professionals think about it is very deep and nuanced, and it means a lot of different things. So when we're able to be that connecting point, and we can help translate and also support the adults, because they very often are coming in with some of their own traumas, their own perceptions, sometimes even an unconscious bias, we're really able to make a lot of progress. And, the whole world would benefit if we could just spend a little time getting to know each other.
Indeed. Yeah, time. I hear you saying that's such a critical factor of developing relationship, but how powerful that can be. Another thing that just stuck out to me in the story that you shared about the 5-year-old was just also thinking how the symptom itself was not the solve, right? Like getting the kid to sit, right? That was the surface level symptom. But man, that symptom told a story. And I'm hearing that you kind of made this motion when you're describing getting under the symptom and kind of understanding that it has a story. And when you can get to know the story and get to know the real, the real person in the relationship, it can make a big difference.
Yeah, that's right. I think about it, it's true really with people of all ages, but we have a mentoring program that was conceptualized by a group of kids from my old days at Chicago Scholars, and that's a college to career program. And when I first joined JPA, I called about 12 of them together. Now, I knew these kids' backstories. These were all older versions of the kids that we're serving. The difference is these were kids who had mentors or supporters. They had that internal capacity and resilience to make it. But that didn't mean that there wasn't suffering along the way, or that there weren't still issues, social emotional issues. However, they'd all gone and graduated from college. And I called them back and said, what do we need to know? It was really interesting, because the first round around the table was all the successful, wonderful things that they were doing as professionals. You know, they're on the partnership track in law firms, they're teachers, they're doctors, they're nurses, they're bankers. But as we continued to talk about their siblings and their friends who didn't make it with them, they also had to pass the Kleenex. And I will never forget, ever, one student who said to me, Karen, nobody ever talked to us about mental health until college. And then it was too late. And sitting next to me was one young woman I didn't know that well. And she was quiet through most of it. But I noticed that she was sobbing silently. They were just, I get emotional just thinking about it. Tears just running down her face. And she finally spoke up and said that she'd grown up in Chicago in a neighborhood called Back of the Yards. And that is one of these underserved neighborhoods. And she and her best friend had done everything together, kindergarten all the way through high school, extracurricular. They were, going to a prestigious university together. They were just about to go into their last year of college, and her best friend dropped out. And the question she asked was, why her and not me? Why me and not her? And this is really the work that all of us at PsiAN and JPA are trying to do. We're trying to answer that question. Why? Why are people struggling? How can we help them? How could we do more for her so that she doesn't feel guilty, and perhaps for her friends so that she can get back on track? And what I know, and what I'm really convinced about with the work that I'm doing in all the organizations, is we should be hopeful. That's what I believe, that there is a way through relationships and connections to change the trajectory of grief into some level of joy, that we can overcome the most horrific traumas. And we work with kids every day, whether it's the neighborhood trauma or the home life trauma. It's so powerful that we also not only work to destigmatize mental health, but let people know that mental health is also about happiness and fulfillment, and taking those moments to appreciate the beauty that is around us and connecting with other people is meaningful. And that's the work of mental health.
Yes. I got chills when you said, why me and not her? Why her and not me? And also thinking about the idea that to ask and to endeavor to answer the question of why cannot be found in a book, but rather, or a manual, but rather, through, self-exploration, insight, and that often is fostered by a relationship. Or at least that's my bias there.
Well, and it's what science stands for, right? Relationships, depth, and insight. And that does take time. And so, we use CBT kinds of methods, and we're big supporters of different programs in the schools. And we also think for some of these deeply rooted traumas, if we want to lift a generation, let's invest. And we're investing in the time in developing the relationship. We've got kids who enter the treatment room, won't look at us. And through play and through, high quality mental health services, we develop a relationship based on trust and safety. It makes me think a little bit about this 13, 14-year-old kid who was in a program for children transitioning into ninth grade that we created because of that focus group I was just talking about. So give me a couple of ideas. What should we be thinking about? They had two ideas. The first one is get a hashtag, which is so, I guess they're not millennials. What are they now? It was really cute. But the second thing is they said, they need support, they need relationships to transition from middle to high school. And there's tons of research that says kids that makes good, successful transitions into high school do better. And they're 4 times more likely, 3.5 to 4 times more likely to graduate. Think about that. That relationship can really boost graduation rates.
Wow.
Well, anyway, so we started a program based on their recommendation. We called it Ninth Gear. And one of these young men raised his hand and said, you know, we talk a lot about respect, but I don't really know if I know what that means. And then all the kids were chiming in saying, yeah, we hear that word a lot. Maybe we know it, but do we really know what it means? And again, it was giving children time and space with support to feel comfortable enough to say, what does that mean? And that led this, it just opened up a whole dialogue about what is respect for these young people? How do they, you know, they look around them, they see what's going on in the news, they see some of the injustices and discrimination that they face, and they say, where's the respect for me? And what do I owe others? And why is it important? And it all gets back again and again to the relationship, to that insights that those young people were sharing with themselves and gaining for themselves. And it's the depth of the conversation, not a surface, let's do norms, let's all respect each other and moving on. It's taking time to hear what our children say, and they do have real lives, and they're important that we pay attention to them.
Yes. Wow. And they're sharing that with each other, their various experiences of it. And
it was really powerful. And, you know, kids at that age, like, where's the design structure in this? And it's not clear to me that just as kids care more about their peers' opinions and less so about adult influence, they're entering some of the riskiest times of their lives. For the kids we're working with, that could be, do I join the gang? Do I, you know, we have one kid who learned to count because his dad would bring home his drug money. You know, I mean, there are real risks out there for kids that many of us have never had any experience within our own families or our own communities, or maybe we have. The point, though, being they're all the kids belong to all of us in one way or the other. But we're connected.
That's powerful. Gosh, your work is so cool, and these groups that you're the research and the groups that you're engaging in, so cool. I'm really excited to learn about this.
Well, come and join us.
I mean, I'm hearing about it. I'm feeling excited about it. So
yeah, there's so much good work to be done, and just so believe. Well, here's my button. I should have put that on before. I don't know if you can see it.
Stigma. Talk about it. Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, you know, one thing that you mentioned earlier, I brought up the idea of, you know, asking the question why, or even what you just shared, like exploring, like, what does respect mean? That those are really depth-oriented questions, and you brought up the idea of like utilizing some tools and skills from CBT. And I guess I wanted to ask, earlier when we had spoken a couple weeks ago, you mentioned not knowing that there were even different options of therapies. And I also wanted to share with you that before I went to graduate school, I honestly did not realize there were so many different options of therapies. So how did you come to learn about different types of therapies, and what got you interested in that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I didn't realize there were so many different types of therapy. In our family, we have Access Mental Health Services, and they were primarily CBT. And I have friends who have used that modality with wonderful success. So I want to be really thoughtful about is saying that it's, you know, it really needs to be matched with the need. But I think sometimes part of the message that PsiAN offers is depth means time, it means skill, it means nuance, it means a lot of different things. It does not mean if you would only try harder or breathe 10 times. Those are good things. But it really, you know, some of the traumas that we work with are so hidden from people that saying, well, we're going to move on because this week we're going to tackle this topic. There's a time and a place for that. But as I've said earlier, with some of the children that we work with, we might sit with these kids for a long time. We often have teachers say, well, they've been with you for a month. I'm not seeing a change in the classroom. Like, let's go back and compare symptoms and adversities and find out why you're not seeing it quite yet. Or perhaps you missed the signal that something important is taking place in the therapy room. Let's talk about that in a way that's confidential and appropriate. So I don't think I did understand enough. And it gets back to the language difference. And until I came to JPA, which is very much around narrative therapies, relational therapy, psychodynamic, psychotherapy, I didn't even know those options existed. So I'm grateful that the world led me here. And I'm grateful to try and have this opportunity to share with people. It's so important, and you have every right to keep seeking the kind of treatment that works best for you, and ask about the relationship part of it, and ask about the time. And this is why the work of PsiAN also, to ensure that the work that we're doing is fairly compensated by insurance companies and others. And it's actually beneficial and cost effective, so that you don't have recidivism and other issues. As we know from the ACEs study, healthcare problems and diabetes and alcoholism and drug abuse, and it goes on and on. And so at JPA and PsiAN, I was introduced to this wonderful opportunity to take the time to explore issues and to really get underneath the symptoms to the root causes, and then work with the, sometimes I tell people, if you don't want to think about it as being in therapy, think of it as social emotional coaching. Whatever phrase you need to work on that works for you is okay, as long as you have a relationship with the person you're working with.
Yes. So I guess you kind of alluded to the work you've started doing with PsiAN. I was curious, how did you get involved in PsiAN initially?
Gosh, I was invited by Dr. Patricia Walker to a on-the-table conversation. And I sat next to Janice Muir, one of the three co-founders of PsiAN. And I was talking a little bit about some of our family experience and how I was now at JPA, and I'd learned about this thing called psychotherapy. And she said, oh, I want to follow up and talk to you. And that's how that started, through a connection.
Of course, a relationship.
Where we were talking about it on the table. There you go. Yeah, that's how that all came about.
I see. Well, very cool, and so excited that you're, involved with PsiAN and on the steering committee. And I'm wanting to also ask you, like, in your ideal fantasy, and in your hopes, and I know we talked about hope earlier. What do you hope to see? Let's say, in the future of psychotherapy, in the future of maybe the work that PsiAN can do, like, what do you hope to see shift?
And understanding that the problems that people face every day, I think about those kids around the table. When I sat behind closed doors, I've been behind the locked doors of psych wards. I've been out in parks, wherever I could get time with a kid. And oftentimes, they're not crying about their classwork or even financial aid, although finances are always an issue. They were crying about, why do my parents do that? Or why do I keep making the same bad choices? Why can't I seem to get the success in my life that I really am dreaming about? There are all these inhibitors, all these barriers, all this trauma, and a lot of times it's hidden. It's not understood. So my hope is that we can continue to talk about mental health. We can destigmatize it. we can work more to encourage more young people of color to come into the field, so that it's not so hard to find people who practice therapy of depth and insight in relationship. Because I know that if we can make those connections, people can feel and function better wherever they are.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'm excited for that future. I'm with you on that.
I know it would. Yes. Well, we're all working on it. So that's the goal.
Yes. Yeah.
And all these little cumulative efforts, Natasha, the work that you're doing, that the founders of PsiAN, Linda, Nancy, and Janice are working on, all the steering committee members, all the individual members, it makes a difference. We should always remember that we're strong together. And I thank you for your time today and your interest. You're a wonderful host. Oprah should be careful.
Coming for her now. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your answers. And I'll look forward to connecting and seeing where this goes.
Well, come on back to Chicago. We'll welcome you back to open arms, and we might even be able to do that in person. So that would be great.
Fingers crossed.
I know. Okay, no more of these. Take care, Natasha. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.